Okay.
Oh,
Okay, we are doing how to transfer to a new therapist.
yes,
Basically.
transferring it.
Transferring
Transfer like a
on
bank
this
account.
lovely snowing.
Snowy
What is this?
morning.
Almost April, March.
Yeah. I'm glad that it's snowing.
I'm not at
I'm
all.
not glad at all. Like I was saying earlier, picking up my RV trailer, if this were to stick, which there's a little mount thing that I have to go over, a little hill. I'm not Chris Kringle. I don't need to pull, I'm not, it's not a sled I need to pull. Hey, can you imagine? I know somebody who had they were pulling their trailer from Mount Hood
Mhm.
and it started snowing. It was like an inch. When you put your brakes on, I don't know if you ever towed a trailer like this, it has electric brakes that go to the back,
Right.
but it is based on resistance. So there's no resistance. So the trailer, this guy's like, the trailer went into the other lane. So he's like this, the trailer went, and he's watching the trailer come by him like,
like
hello, trailer. Of course, it's like terrifying. So that needs to not happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just started snowing and it's very light. I'm sure everything's going to close down here in about an hour in Oregon.
What's going to happen? Well, we saw snowflakes, so we shut the city down.
Right.
It's only going to cost a few $1 million. No big deal. Anyway, well, let's
all right. Let's get going.
Get this party started.
Now we're at 10. Try to find ourselves in a little sweet spot here.
Spot of sweetness.
All right, here we go. Oh, that was a good one. Dang, I was not. I would not have bet in that.
Yeah, I wonder if the mic picked that up. Little pop. Oh,
all right. You ready?
Yep.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Shrink Think podcast. We are here on this lovely snowing day, and we're recording here in Oregon in March, actually. And
this is not Alaska, by the way.
No, you might be deceived if you were to see it outside. But we are excited to be here and talk about a very helpful topic. Actually, I've mentioned it to a couple of people in the past week or so since the idea came up. And I think it's going to be really helpful. Everyone that I've talked to has said that it's one of those subjects that's really kind of overlooked. I think everybody sort of just deals with it, which is actually kind of a lot of what our topics are. Like people just deal with it and we're like, why? Why do you have to deal with it? Let's talk about it on our podcast. Let's expose that thing. So we're going to be talking about transferring to a new therapist. So this would be for people, I guess it's for clients who are going to therapy and maybe for whatever reason, good or bad, maybe it's a normal thing. I've got a friend who is closing her practice, taking another job. Shout out to Heather. What up? She is closing her practice. And so her clients need somewhere else to go to a new therapist. There's nothing bad that's happened, in the relationship. They just need to continue whatever they're doing with someone else. And maybe there's another situation out there where people are maybe they've gotten what they need from their current therapist and they need something else or something different. We've talked about that on our podcast before. That's a thing. And so what do you do? How do you make that handoff well? And what do you need to know transferring to a new therapist? What can you do with your current therapist to prepare yourself for this transition? And then, of course, on the other side, you've got, if you're a therapist, what are some things that you need to know? Because I feel like, and I'm just going to let you guys know, I feel like a lot of therapists don't really know, or they don't really think about this a whole lot. They just focus on, basically closing out their current client and making sure that they end that relationship well, and probably a little bit of transition, make sure that they've got some referrals to this new person, but maybe it's not as much handoff or as much connection, smooth transition between those two things as possible. So we're going to kind of unpack that a bit. And to be honest, we have not scripted this. We haven't really even talked about it, but these are the things that we do on a daily basis. So we're like, let's just open a bag and see what we packed.
What do you mean we don't script it? We don't write out our every single conversation ahead of time.
Yeah, we haven't made an outline.
Now.
Yeah. Wait, Nathan, you laughed too early. That you had to wait a little bit. Okay, now
that was honestly accidentally perfect. Anyway, I think the thing you brought up there at the end, There is, I think, just to be clear, and I'm sure you agree with this, that referrals are normal, right? There is a difference, though, between making the decision as a therapist that when you're kind of just, it's just whatever the thing is not your thing. So getting in, for example, with the easiest one, I think the easiest one to see is with working with couples when you're a therapist, because it oftentimes can get to the point with a couple that you realize, like, okay, there's some other mental health stuff going on here. And then part of that decision is, can you do a one-off? Can you like
meet with one person individually?
Yeah, like maybe one or two times and just like fix it, so to speak, like express it. I picture like probably expressing as it, that's evil. No, you don't think about it, but like just and move back into the couples. But there's sometimes when you realize as a therapist, like, okay, this is not gonna work. There's too much going on. So you end up essentially getting out of the couple dynamic entirely. And so that process, which we can talk more about, I'm not sure which direction you want to go first, or and with the individual like person that's in there,
The client.
like the individual client, that one's a little bit more, I think it's honestly a bit more difficult for the therapist, because to kind of realize like the difference between referring for a specific situation and referring because you, especially for younger therapists, there can be this element of like, oh, I'm not very good at this, maybe somebody else should do it, because there's already, we've talked about it before, like imposter syndrome and that kind of thing.
Or maybe somebody just, as you've been working with your client, you've discovered that maybe it's more complex than you realized, or there are just more issues going on that you're not, this isn't your specialty, and somebody else that's got more expertise or experience might be better suited to work with them.
And honestly, the hairy one, the one that's like it's just hard to deal with if you're in that situation, the complexity is the personality disorders. You get into that and you realize, oh my goodness, I do not work with this. I don't even kind of work with this. And with personality disorders, it's often true that it's unlikely statistically that things are going to quote unquote get fixed. And then on the other side, it's hard to tell somebody, that conversation like, oh, we can't work together because you're a narcissist. No, I mean, you actually have the personality disorder, not kind of, you're not just self-absorbed. You have a personality disorder.
So these are, I'm glad you said this, because this is kind of getting into like, how do you prepare those people for moving to the next person? Like, again, whether it's you're going to smoothly transition and continue your work, or in this case, we're talking about you've got some issues and some needs that I can't provide services for, right? I'm not the right fit for you. So in that case, you would be well suited, I think, to call out whatever those things are, put some like labels on those things. And I don't mean you're just labeling stuff like you've got this disorder, if you got that disorder, if you got this other disorder, and these other disorders as well.
You are so messed up. Right. You need a specialist, which is probably doesn't even exist.
Right.
Good luck, Google.
That's not what I mean. It's more like put a word to whatever it is that you've been diagnosing and treating, so that the other person, the client, knows exactly what it is that we've been working on. Sometimes you don't have that conversation, like maybe you do in the very beginning, and then you just kind of continue on with your treatment, and maybe you don't really know the specific nature of it. But when you need to package it up and then bring it to a new therapist and then basically give them a summary report, so to speak, of what you've been working on in your previous therapist office, then you need to have some like words and language around like, okay, this is what my diagnosis was, or these are the issues I've been working on. This is a rough outline of my treatment plan, and this is where I'm at in my progress. That kind of stuff as a therapist is great to be able to give to your client, so that they know and they can kind of write down, or if you want to write a summary statement or whatever, develop something together so that you're on the same page about here's what we've been doing, here's where you're at in it, and here's what you need from this next therapist so that you can pick up where you left off in my office.
So let's do a common one, maybe like each one of us give an idea of how we would handle it. The common one on the therapist side, I feel like, is bipolar and borderline. So on paper, so to speak, on the intake process coming in, it's not necessarily that easy to discern. I mean, obviously, you have to meet the person to understand what's going on. And on paper, the irregularity of somebody's actions and what they're reporting could be related to mood, not necessarily the psychology of personality. So you can think about that this person might have bipolar, and then as you get to know them better, you realize it's not about mood dysregulation. It's more like, okay, this is a personality dysregulation. But you can be pretty far down the road sometimes, and I've had to deal with this question, and typically the way it ends, unfortunately, is the borderline person keeps kind of ramping up into behavior, and the therapist realizes that they're borderline when that's kind of beyond like where it should
Like
have
now
been.
that it's too late, it's like, oh, now that it's hit me in the face like a 2x4. Oh, it's a 2x4. Okay.
Right. I hate wood. Right. Anyway, so stop it. Anyway, so I was thinking in relationship to this, probably what I would do. It's been a long time since I've actually had to deal with that, and that's probably just fortunate. It's not has nothing to do with like screening in that way, because this is a sneak past the goalie one. Is I would speak more in general terms, like in therapy, one of the things we do at diagnostics is we have these things called rule outs. And what those are is kind of just speculations, right? So I'm talking to the client right now and I'm saying, where we have been conceptualizing you as we've been working is in this, that is with bipolar. You've talked about that. We've talked about that. And what I'm recognizing now is that we probably need to work towards ruling out what's called borderline personality disorder. And the problem with that for me as a therapist, not for you, is that that's not really my specialty. I'm not sure how well I can discern that. So what I need to do at this point is we need to work to referring you to someone who works with this on a more regular basis. And so what questions do you have of me? Right. And so, because then I'm trying to keep this global, we're not making the person a problem. We're inviting them into this whole process, basically helping them to be a part of the switch, the change of what's going on in therapy. The other piece too that you end up having to navigate when you put those questions over, in my mind, is what the relationship. Well, did I do something wrong? Like, those kind of questions that the person might ask, like, what do you mean? What's the problem? And unfortunately, some of these disorders come with it that the person could dysregulate, and they could be completely mad at you as a therapist for even saying this, like, I can't believe, and you're just like everyone else, and that kind of thing. And so because of that, you would want to bring this in probably in the first 20 minutes of the session. So you have plenty of time to be able to navigate this. And also, before you bring it up, reversing, as you look at your caseload, you need to have reached out, like in the sense of at least search for kind of who out there in your community probably is more likely to be able to work with this situation. So that's kind of your due diligence. I'm not sure if you would add or change anything to.
No. I want to move into what do you actually say to the client so that they can package this up and take this to their therapist? Because I think a lot of people, what I'm hearing is they'll go to a new therapist and the therapist will say like, okay, so you've worked with this other person, like, where are you at? Who are you? And or the person is like, I don't want to start over. I don't want to tell my whole story. And actually, this was really good. A couple of people that I talked with, their therapist told them, don't start over. Don't tell them you need to start over. We've already gone over that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to tell your entire story. Maybe you can give them these highlights, right? You can tell the therapist, these are the things that are impactful. Like, my dad was an alcoholic, and then my mom, took us in the middle of the night and we ran away when I was 11 or whatever. And that has resulted in these kind of symptoms or these dynamics with me. Maybe it's affecting me in these ways, or I have these kinds of relationships because of that, and I'm working on codependency or expressing my needs or whatever. It's like, great, that's a good story, like a summary of your issues without going into, so tell me your name and what was your relationship with each one of your parents. You're like, oh, we've already been over this, right? It's like you can summarize all that stuff and you can give this to your client so that they're prepared to say and to know when they go into that therapist's office, I don't want to waste my time. I just want to pick up where I left off. And that therapist can hopefully, if you're listening to this, you can take that and say, oh, okay, I'm going to skip over some of this background stuff because this other therapist prepared you well. They also listened to the Shrink Think podcast. And so we're on the same page.
That's obvious. So the other thing, though, that you, in light of that, that you can trust as a client. So if you're listening to this thinking like, yeah, but there's a lot of detail there. There was a lot of work there. Not naturally, us as therapists, when you give us that summary, we may say something like, several sessions down the road, you've transferred, you're over. Hey, you mentioned that before that your dad was an alcoholic. Can you tell me more about that? So, because if it's something that's coming up and the therapist needs to know, they will ask, because it'll be one of those things in our minds as we're just thinking about how to help you. It comes up of like, oh, they did this. But the same way, actually, we might remember an intake in the situation where we've never, where you haven't done any work and we've just wanted to ask that question. We realize, oh, this could apply. So we'll ask more about it. You don't have to worry that like, oh no, it's not going to be enough. It's never going to be the way I need it to be. It will be.
So maybe one of the first things that you can do with your therapist is start by asking and answering the questions. Okay, client, what is it that you want or you need your next therapist to know about you? And then maybe you can ask that same thing of the therapist. What does the therapist think that this new therapist needs to know from professional to professional, right? So you each have your own sort of lists of things that you need to say, and then you can talk those through. How do we package that well so that you as a client, if you're listening, you can say those things concisely in a way that's going to make sense to the therapist's ear. So you can have that conversation and talk with the therapist about it, maybe kind of revise it a little bit or edit it down so that it's sort of consumable. It's true to you as a client and your story, but it's also consumable for the therapist to hear in a way that's going to make sense to them and be useful to you. But then also, like, what are some of the things that the therapist can say to the new therapist of like, hey, you need to be aware of this. Like when this thing happens, this person is going to need this kind of care. That's what they respond well to, for example.
Right. One of the things that I would love to hear as the therapist that's receiving you back, like after you've done whatever work, would be, I want to have the answer to the question, what was the most crucial part of your change process that really made sense to you? Because that tells me how you process. It tells me what it is that was important to you as far as what was on your mind. And it also means that now I kind of have more of a direction in my mind of what you're passionate about, what you hope to have with me, and where you're hoping to go. Because I can ask questions like, how was that important to you? Like, how are you expecting that exact same thing now, like as we move forward? Because maybe you're in a different space, maybe you necessarily won't, but how do you imagine that would happen?
Or even like what made that possible? Like if that was the thing, what did you guys do together to make that possible, that led up to it? Or even kind of as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, what are some of the dynamics between you and the therapist that made that possible? Or what were some of the dynamics between you and the therapist that were really valuable and impactful to you that maybe I need to pick up and pay attention to between us? And it doesn't mean that I need to be that other therapist at all. That's not what we're saying. It's more of like, well, I would say this, and then my therapist would always like stay on me instead of like letting me kind of meander into whatever. The therapist would like stay on me and challenge me, like, I see that you're kind of wandering a little bit. Can you stay focused on this feeling? And that was really helpful because I didn't want to go there, but I knew I needed to. And so that's the kind of dynamic that maybe you're needing from your new therapist. Anybody can do that if they know that that's the relationship dynamic.
Right. The other piece of that just needs to be honored is sometimes you just have a click with the other therapist. It's just a personality click. And you recognize that was a huge part of the transformation you've already gone through. That's okay. I mean, it helps the therapist that you're sitting with know, like, okay, well, probably the relationship's going to be a big deal. You take this relationship seriously, and whatever happens next is going to be different. So that part's important.
And that's okay. It's really interesting because like I can think of somebody like Nathan and I are similar in certain ways, but we are also very different in a lot of ways, very different, I think, in our styles. And I can think of someone that has worked with me and then is working with you,
Yeah.
and I know that she gets a lot out of her therapy with you, and I'm pretty sure she got a lot out of her therapy with me. I'm hoping that was the case, that she didn't leave from me to you because it's like, well, that's enough of that. I think I'm a good therapist, so I think I did what I needed to do for that time period. And even though she went to you and you're a totally different person, different style, different personality, she can still benefit, and she has still been benefiting for the time that she's been working with you. Even though it's different, people will bring out different sides of you, or they'll impact you different. And just because it's different doesn't mean it's not going to be effective.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go a different direction, because the other person I have in mind interviewed both of us, went to a couple sessions, and that person's still with you.
Right. She was like, Nathan, not gonna do that one. Nope. No, thank you.
What was interesting to me about that, though, was like, normally you actually don't hear anything. Like, so there's some people out there, some clients that will go to different people, and then like, you just don't, they're just gone. They don't, you check in to see like, hey, did you want to get on or whatever, the schedule, and they don't, they just don't write you back. They ghost you. In this situation, it was like, I get to find out exactly what like, and it was honestly it's just a focus and a personality difference.
That's right.
Had nothing else to do with anything. And I was like, oh yeah, well, we are different, and that is the way that we are different. So it just was very specific, and it was interesting.
So if you're the new therapist and you are receiving this client, I think it's really important for you to know that this person has done some work with their therapist, and hopefully that therapist has prepared them well to transition to you. I mean, I do get people like, oh yeah, my therapist is retiring. I need a new person to work with. Can this be you? Like, when I'm receiving a new client in that situation, I'm making some assumptions that they've done some good work with that previous therapist. They have some awareness of their issues. They can communicate those to me. And so I don't necessarily need to start from the beginning. So I guess that's partly what I'm saying is, if you're a therapist that's receiving a new client, don't think that you need to start from ground zero, from like, let's go back because that's what you do with every new person, is you're like, okay, let me get your whole history, your whole story. Let me run through all. No. Like, I'm continuing where I was at. So I need to be able to skip over all that. And in fact, it's going to be a huge waste of my time, a turnoff. It's going to be like a relationship stress if I have to sit through all of this as a client, because I already know all this. Right. So if you're a therapist receiving that person, let yourself skip past that and try to pick up where they left off as best you can.
Yeah, and remind yourself, it's okay. Like, a lot of times the main thing that happens, the main transition that happens, is the person didn't have a good fit with the therapist where they're coming from. And so that part of it, oftentimes as therapists, we'll think about all the stuff we have to fix or repair from the other situation, like we're somehow a better therapist or whatever. Like, of course you found me, I'm awesome,
Well, and then the next person's gonna have to repair with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's what Nathan's been doing with this lady. You're like, I spent 2 years working with Aaron, and I'm really traumatized. And it's like, I know, we're working it out. It's gonna take a while to recover.
Yeah. So I just wanted to honor that. So in conclusion, what you want to do is get prepared in the sense of knowing what it is that you're going to say in the next situation. So if your therapist, for example, wasn't thinking about that up front, maybe it's kind of more of a thing that you're realizing needs to happen, and you've brought it up, just let them know, like, I would love to process what it's like to transition and develop an actual plan of something to give the next therapist. That therapist the therapist you're talking with, you're transitioning from, should kind of intuitively know what it is that you need to bring with you, and they should not be offended. And I don't like to shit on people, but like, shouldn't happen.
It actually, when I get those kinds of things, it feels like the client is like super prepared. They're like very prepared to do this work. Like, I'm here and I want to do these things. Can you help me? And I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. Like, you're ready to go. You must have listened to the Shrink Thing podcast.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And just keep in mind as a therapist that this is all, as you already know, kind of a normal part, but for the younger folks out there as therapists, there's a difference between referral and transition. And just looking every time that you think that you do need to refer, like, do they need a transition? Like, how significant is it? And how am I going to prepare to do that? Because it is different. And so if you can be honest with yourself, both, therapist and client, be able to receive the information and just know that this is just about health. This is not about any one person. It's about the goals of the client coming to fruition in the best and fastest way possible and the less stigmatizingly way possible. So with that, have a great day.